Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today we're thrilled to be joined by Matt Hookings, who is a writer, producer, and actor of the film Prizefighter, The Life of Jem Belcher. And I wanted to start by talking a little bit about the writing process, because this is a story that you've been in development with from the initial conceptualization of the idea to actually making the film over the course of about 10 years. And it sounds like you wrote an incredibly extensive number of drafts, kind of going back through a lot of details. And I was interested in kind of, once you felt like you really had the structural core of the story, what some of the details were that you found yourself still continuing to finesse a lot in those continued drafts.
Right, it's a good question. Thanks for having me. God, the writing took 10 years. I think it was probably under exaggeration. I did over 300 drafts in script. It was just, crazy. And I just wanted to get it so right. I wanted to get it to a point where, Russell Crowe or whoever, Ray Winstone, read the script and just go, okay, we don't care who's behind it. This is great. Let's do this. So it was a very, very, very heavily edited script, to the point where it was, almost edited for screen in that sense. So, scenes kept being cut, dialogue kept being tweaked the whole way through. And, I just kept on it until, some people along the way would say, yeah, it's great, it's right now. I just kept working on it until literally, people picked up and went, wow, this is now great. And it just, I didn't have a writing background, so I had to really learn on my feet. I've written a couple of short films before, but I just wanted to make it, I wanted the dialogue to sing. I wrote it very visual. So it was this massive visual world where, a writer, a non-writer, a director, a non-director, anyone could pick it up and read it and kind of visualize and put themselves in that world. And that made it kind of, I wanted to do it that way to make it, easier to read. And I wanted people to really just be, sort of transported to that world. So it was really big. I went through a bit of a disappointing stage with the writing, because when we came to shooting, budgets got cut and things got changed and locations dropped out. So, a couple of weeks before shooting, I was doing edits on the script, and people in the background telling me, you've got to cut this, you've got to cut that because it costs too much money. So there was a lot more to the script that had to be cut. There was a lot of textured, bits with characters. Lord Camelford was, chewing sugar as part of his character, just to kind of, bring a bit of texture to that. We had loads of animals that I wanted, elephants at the fights and all this crazy stuff, which, maybe I'll do the TV series and get someday. But it just, that was a bit of a challenge in that sense. And then in one way, having myself on set every day working as the actor also helped with the writing, because I was able to, think on the spot and change things and also adapt to changes that other cast had made. So Ray would turn up and say, what if I say this today? And either the idea would be great, yeah, that's fantastic, or no, you can't say that because someone else said it yesterday. And it was just a mammoth of a process to keep track on. And it was just me, I was the writer, the script editor, that I was doing all the scenes and making sure it all made sense for the first AD and the director. So it was just I spent a lot of my days in pre-production, like fixing things and sorting things out. Matt, we've got that carriage. Okay, you can put that in the script. We don't have this. Cut that out. So it was a bit of a hit, because the world itself, if this was done with a major studio, we had 50 million or 30 million, we would have had the whole world. It was a very much Amadeus kind of world where, when you walk through the setting and the scenery, you have the animals, you had things that really put you in the world. And eventually most of that had to get cut because we didn't have the funding to do it. So, but the writing process itself was really great. I enjoyed it. It was an up and down experience, because I was very much learning, to write a feature film essentially on, off the back of not written a feature film before. But I love it now. So it's, it ended up being a skill that I really, really like. And I had to become good at it because I did so many bloody drafts of it. So.
And the research element's quite interesting as well, because with Jem Belcher, there's no singular text that's been written about him, but it's more about finding mentions of him in other places and descriptions of fights. And so what did a lot of the research process look like in terms of the story development? Because I've even heard you mention that there's also a lot of contradictory information where even the date that he maybe was in a particular fight is listed as two different things. And so how did you kind of find a lot of the research material that was going to give you those little inflections of detail, and then look at some of the information that matched up or was contradictory and kind of determine what made sense for the story you were telling?
Well, look, the reason why it took 10 years from writing to to creating the film, I spent 2 years in the British Library just trying to find anything I could on him. There was no books written on him. He was relatively unknown. He was actually, he was unknown by even boxing purists. So I had to find a book on someone else that had then mentioned Jem. And in one way, it was tough because I had to do a lot of research and find nuggets and bring them into his story. But on the other side, it gave me a bit of creative freedom. So I'd find court records where one said he fought on this date, and the other one said no, he fought the other date, and he was this age, and that even his age was changing. So I thought, I'll use that creative freedom to bring into the story, which is partly why the birth of and the evolution of boxing is kind of crammed into Prizefighter itself. The beginning of the sport is bare knuckle, and the end of the film is when they're first using the gloves, which we cheated that a little bit to kind of show the evolution of the sport and what it represented in that time frame. So some of the key things for me with Jem in the research, youngest ever champion, blind at 22 and dead by the time he was 30. That was my opening pitch. Then as I was finding more information out about him, I don't know if you've read this or heard of it, but I started figuring out the connections between me and him, because originally I wasn't writing this going, hey, I want to play the lead actor in a film. And it was just like, wow, his story fascinated me. I just felt like it had to be told. And then these things kept coming up. I remember finding his weight and his height and his size, and it was similar to myself, which is quite rare to compare someone that's 220 years before you. And then I found one sort of quite important document that said his mum's name was Mary, which my mum's name is Mary as well. Then something else hit hard, where he died on the 30th of July, which is my birthday. And then the other thing was that he fought a fighter called Henry Pierce, which is at the end of the film. As one of his kind of triumph fights in terms of it was dubbed the Forgotten Fight of the Century, and Pierce is the last name of my dad, who was British heavyweight champion, and that's how the whole story started and came together. So it was this whirlwind of a kind of like not sort of too spiritual in that sense, but it felt like there was some weird energy and connection driving me to bring his story to life. And the most important thing that people seem to be picking up on is no one knew anything about Jem, so the fact that this actually exists is a great thing. And there's so many other characters and so many other things that were happening at the time which are just fascinating, which I could I need a couple of lifetimes to to try and help bring them all to life. So yeah.
And you're bringing up there the evolution of the sport and how even at that particular time, that was a real crux for the sport and the game itself changing quite a bit. And it's especially given that you grew up very absorbed into the world of boxing through your dad, and came to this with knowledge of it already. I was interested in that journey and that process of kind of taking what you already knew about the sport and then really doing this deep dive back towards what was the sport like in the 1800s, because it was a very, very different type of sport. I imagine stylistically the fights are very different, and you can really see that in a lot of those scenes. And so how did you kind of uncover and figure out visually what that needed to look like in terms of how you then wrote it into the script, but also then how you were performing those scenes alongside the other actors in the film?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's two things. First of all, I mean, my dad passed away from boxing related injuries. So I actually didn't know too much about the sport. It was the thing that my mum said, never do, So bizarrely through this film, I've learned so much about my dad, and I've fallen in love with the sport through this film. And in many ways, boxing saved me because of all the stress and anxiety that I went through throughout the making of it. So that's one thing I learned so much through this film about the sport. In terms of the style and the way it was, I mean, it blew my mind. I read something that Jem wrote about this treaty of boxing, and it was the first time I started comparing him to like a 220-year-old version of Muhammad Ali, because I'm reading this small treaty, the only thing I found that he wrote, and it was about the speed and the jab and the scientific approach and the mind behind boxing, which was just unheard of at the time. So he was way ahead of his time. This is a smart young man who was way ahead of his time, and he dressed the way he wanted to, and he spoke the way he wanted to, and he was very involved in bringing the celebrity figure of boxing into the mainstream public at the time. So he was way ahead of his time, and there's been a bit of I've had a bit of backlash in the sense of, they wasn't using gloves at that time and they weren't doing this. But what I found in my research is they actually, a lot of fighters were sparring in gloves. A lot of fights were happening in gloves. It wasn't the norm. It was the same as, what people were preaching so many years ago. It's now become the norm. So he was really revolutionary at the time. And, the journey that he was, the time frame he was alive was definitely a golden age of boxing. So I tried to, I knew the hook of this film would be, the birth of boxing. I knew the hook would be, okay, the beginnings of how boxing started and how it was created and who these people were, jump to where, as close as we can get to now in terms of the rules and the sport. But, the way they trained was very different. And the brutality of it was just crazy. Jem had a fight with a guy that was 56 rounds. And you could never include that in the film. It's just crazy. So they just literally fought until they couldn't fight anymore. And eventually what happened is people started getting killed, and that's how the rules and regulations and gloves came into place a little bit later. So yeah, it just fascinated me with that world. It kind of felt very much like just really brutal and raw, and at the same time there was all this textured, economic, social, and the Industrial Revolution was changing lives as well. There was a war going on with Napoleon. So, all that side just fascinated me. And I tried to just, drop little nuggets in here and there. One of the big things was so many women used to go and watch Jem fight. So we dropped that into the story as well. And one of the scenes with the female characters, she says, women are there watching, you just have to notice them. And it's kind of a nice little play and plug on, taking notice of people at the time, which was dubbed just a very male dominated sport. I hope that answers your question, I think.
No, it does. And, through the film as well, we also see that, it's about what he does in the ring, but also it really transcends outside of that. And he's brought into a lot of kind of very high society rooms. And it's an interesting dynamic because he's there, in essence, as a guest and some element of entertainment for them at the same time. And he's able to move kind of very seamlessly between worlds. And so I was interested in kind of your perspective and how you really viewed him as a character, especially in your performance in those aspects of, everything that he does in the ring and the way that kind of carries him into these really interesting spaces and the way that he finds himself quite adept at being very malleable to these situations.
Yeah, I think, there was quite a few things that we couldn't include in his story because it would just seem unbelievable. Before his fight, he got attacked and stabbed, and these things, him winning the championship so young, he won the title, and then was just put into this from a poor boy in Bristol to hanging out with lords and being a celebrity figure in London. So the key sort of themes of this story was to really give it some heart, in Jem and the fight sequences and the character driven story with the family and the mother. I really wanted to show his rags to riches story. And I wanted to show it quite quickly. I wanted to show him rise to fame quickly, and I wanted to show him fall quickly because that's what happened. And that's normally, when you hear of, especially boxers, they seem to have these, sort of extra textured lives where they rise and get everything in the world and then suddenly crash. I was on tour with Tyson Fury doing the promotion of the film, and you know, he won everything when he won the championship, and the next day he just plummeted. Like, he just completely plummeted, and that led into his mental health and all these kind of things. So I really wanted to really, you know, speed that pace up. And you know, you're delivering to an Amazon 2022 audience, and people's attention span is not the same as it used to be. So people want to see things quickly, and I think his story, you know, like I said, youngest ever champion at 19, blind at 22, and dead by the time it's 30. So I had to tell it quite quickly in that sense, and with pace.
And when he does become injured, and there is that period of time where, you know, he's not able to fight, and he's not even training at that point, you know, it's a very internalized journey for the character, and particularly in that sense of what his identity had become and the way it became so tied into, you know, being this champion and the way that he was revered, and all of those relationship dynamics that came with that for him. And so he becomes kind of, you know, he puts a lot of walls up, and even within himself. And so what were the most important aspects of that very internalized journey of what it means to have his identity so married to something that all of a sudden is completely stripped away from him?
Yeah, you're impressing me so much, because you you just get it. It's so hard to kind of, you know, explain this to people. I watched 160 boxing films from 1927, Hitchcock's first film, The Ring, all the way till now. And one of the key factors I found was, in all these films, it doesn't have to be boxing films, but you know, I was watching these boxing, they were always doing it for someone. They were doing it for, you know, whether Rocky's doing it for Adrian, or someone's doing it for their dog, or their wife, or whatever. And I thought, right, okay, if I can get across Jem and his internal struggle and his genetics that's related to his grandfather and fighting, then that might be something that just gives it a little bit of edge, and just a little bit of difference. So I really wanted him to rise and fall, and I really wanted him to fall through his own kind of mistake, or his own kind of, you know, he had control over it in terms of that. He didn't have to drink. He didn't have to go to the, you know, to the place where he had the accident. All these things could have not happened. So I really wanted that internal struggle to come out, and I really wanted that internal, you know, belief to shine through, especially, you know, no spoiler alerts, but especially at the end, where it doesn't go the way you think it's going to go, but Jem is actually happy, and Jem is complete in many ways, because of the resolution that he's had with his family and his mother. So that was a real, you know, and I'd love to have kind of spent a lot longer with that as well. And again, you know, one of my biggest references was Amadeus, and they did that very well. They really tapped into, you know, the internal struggle of the character, and he was leading the way of where his journey was going. So that was really nice you picked up on that, because I normally have to explain it, and you picked up on it.
You know, and in terms of the external as well, it's also quite interesting to watch that evolution of his fighting style throughout it as well, because it's not you know, we see very early on, he's not necessarily always the biggest and the strongest and the most muscular person in the ring, but he kind of understands the game in a very intellectual way when it comes to boxing. And so how did you kind of work to make sure that there was this real visual difference stylistically from the first time we see him step into the ring, and it's very pure instinct at that point, and then what that evolution is as he trains, but with that in the way that he kind of approaches it very intellectually?
Yeah, I think it's you know, it's like some of the best boxers that have ever lived. They adapt really well to fights. You know, whenever you watch like Floyd Mayweather or Canelo or some of the greatest boxers, they don't always start off the winning fighter or the strongest fighter, or they're winning each round. But what they're doing is adapting, and they're adapting very quickly. So Jem's thought process was always there, that, oh, with it, I don't have to be massive, but if I can move out of the way of the punching, then I can dodge that. If I catch him quickly, and I catch him 3 or 4 times, then that might secure the win. So again, I really wanted to distinguish between, you know, that and the fast pacedness of it, in terms of, like, you know, his first fight in the field, in the forest, is very just like, you know, instinctual, and just kind of, it's just like, right, what do I do? I'm being thrown and hit around. Okay, if I move and dodge out the way and I grab him, and it's a bit, you know, it's a bit of a street fight. And he would have picked that up from his grandfather, watching him fight in the field, you know, when he was younger. So I really wanted that, and then move into a really tough fighter, Andrew Gamble, where he had to be a bit stronger, be a bit aggressive, you know, move like a boxer, but also hit harder and really put him down. And then that shines through where, you know, you see the change in his personality, where he starts having fun and he starts mocking the, you know, the bigger fighters. And then really, you know, the end fight is very much he's doing it for him, he's doing it for his family. And, you know, it's something that he really needs to do just to kind of you know, just to kind of secure his honor, I suppose, to his grandfather. So each fight has, I really wanted it in the writing, I really wanted each fight to have a story and a journey, not just like, oh, they're just having a fight or they're just having a, you know, punch up. I really wanted each fight and each round to have a journey, and the end fight really cements that, because each round has a, like, okay, Jem's winning one, Henry Pierce is winning the other, they both draw, then one gets knocked down, then the other, and then it leads us into this like respect and honor that they have for each other at the very end. So I really wanted to show that progression from the beginning to the end, and have a bit of fun in between, you know, a bit of spitting in one of the fighters' faces and showing off and this kind of stuff, because that's what they did. You know, he wore like purple breeches to fights, and, you know, just fought people with his eyes closed and his hands behind his back, because he was that confident. So yeah, try to really get some of that across.
And then I also wanted to ask a little bit about the collaboration with Daniel Graham, who's the director of the film, because even going back to the way that you were talking about the script earlier, it sounds like you had a lot of very strong visual ideas for how this story could be told as well. And so I was interested in how the two of you really collaborated with some of the visual elements that you were layering into the script that felt really important, you know, but even kind of hearing you talk about the film and just the way that even each location has very distinctive lighting and color choices. And so I was interested in how a lot of the visual aspects of how we've ended up seeing the film came about with the relationship that the two of you had working on this project together.
Yeah, I worked with Daniel on a film before, so we've been involved in that. I produced his second film, and I also acted in his second film as well, The Grand Duke of Corsica, with Tim Spall and Peter Stormare. So we'd already been through that journey before, in many aspects, in terms of the acting and the producing, and, you know, me trying to protect and honor his vision for the Grand Duke. So we had a very good understanding on that sense, and he, you know, his job now was to kind of bring my vision to life in that sense. And as soon as we got to the point where, you know, we hired a lot of the same crew that we worked with, the same DOP, we hired an amazing camera operator that we'd worked with on our last film, who, you know, was one of the main camera operators on Blade Runner and done loads of stuff. So, you know, we really got the visuals were there in the script. You know, he was left to run free on the look and the kind of colors with the DOP and that kind of side. So we'd set it up to a place where I could just focus on the acting, and he could just focus on the visuals, and anywhere then that I could help, if there was any sort of issues or problems, I would jump in and, you know, change stuff and adapt stuff. But we had a very good understanding from early on. And, you know, I really needed, you know, this film business is just bonkers, and I really needed someone. You know, I went through so many directors. You know, Daniel wouldn't mind me saying this. I tried so many. I've been in the room with directors, you know, playing and auditioning and all this kind of stuff. And I really needed a director that would fight my corner if at some point someone said, "Well, wait there, why is this Matt guy playing the lead in a film with Russell Crowe and this and that? We don't care if he's written it, blah blah blah." You know, there's a reason why the story of Rocky and Sylvester Stallone hasn't happened for so long. It's just so bloody difficult. You know, it's almost impossible. It's really challenging. So I had to work with a director who would stand by me and say, "Well, wait there. No, I've worked with Matt as an actor. I've worked with him as a producer, and, you know, and support me and help nurture me in that sense, so I could just focus on the acting," which is what we did. And, you know, it was quite. I would say it was a focused move to make that decision. And Daniel was very much aware of that, and he had read many drafts of script before, so he was thrilled to sort of be involved in that, and we collaborated quite well in that sense.
Yeah. Well, I'm so impressed at the perseverance that it's taken in order to get this film made, particularly over the course of so many years. So congratulations on everything with it. And thank you so much, Matt. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.